The year is 1348. Across the vast expanse of the known world, from the ancient ports of the Mediterranean to the frozen forests of the north, humanity stands unknowingly at the edge of an abyss. The sun rises as it always has, casting golden light across fields where peasants begin their endless labor, across cobblestone streets where merchants arrange their wares, across monastery walls where monks chant their morning prayers. But something moves unseen beneath this familiar rhythm. Something carried on trade winds and merchant ships, in the holds of vessels laden with silk and spices, in the fur of rats that scurry through ship timbers. Death itself is crossing the world, and it will claim more lives in the coming months than any war, any famine, any catastrophe in human memory. The morning air in a Tuscan village hangs thick with the scent of bread, baking in communal ovens. Women emerge from timber-framed houses, their woolen skirts brushing against muddy streets as they carry water from the central well. The village has stood here for centuries, its people living as their ancestors lived, following the same rhythms of planting and harvest, birth and death, feast and fast. Children chase each other between houses, their laughter echoing off stone walls. A blacksmith's hammer rings out its steady rhythm. In the fields beyond the village walls, men bend to their labor, turning soil that has been turned 10,000 times before. This is a world of hierarchies as rigid as stone. At the top, kings and nobles who have never touched a plow, who feast on swan and peacock while peasants survive on dark bread and pottage. Below them, the merchants and craftsmen of growing cities. Men who work with their hands but own their shops, who are beginning to taste wealth their grandfathers never imagined. And at the bottom, the vast majority of humanity. The peasants who work land they will never own, who give half of everything they grow to lords they rarely see, who live and die within a few miles of where they were born, in the great city of Florence. Where wealth flows like the river Arno, life pulses with an energy unknown in the countryside. Stone towers rise above narrow streets where sunlight barely penetrates. The air reeks of human waste tossed from upper windows, of animal dung from horses and oxen, of smoke from countless hearth fires, of the sour smell of the dye works and tanneries. Merchants in fine wool cloaks negotiate in the market square, their fingers quick with coin and calculation. Banking houses, the first in Christian Europe, exchange letters of credit that move wealth across continents. Art is beginning to transform, as painters like Giotto capture human emotion on chapel walls with a realism that startles the eye. But wealth creates density, and density creates danger. Thousands of souls press together within city walls, sharing wells and streets, breathing the same air. Rats nest in the thatched roofs and wooden walls. Fleas hop from body to body in the crowded market squares. The great cities are marvels of human achievement and cesspools of filth existing in the same space. In the same moment, a merchant's wife rises in her house on a Florence street. Her home is prosperous by the standards of the time. Timber beams support plastered walls. Glass, still rare and precious, fills one window. She owns 3 dresses, unimaginable wealth to a peasant woman. Her husband trades in wool, buying raw fleece from English ships and selling finished cloth across the Mediterranean. Their children sleep on straw mattresses in an upper room. They have lost 2 children already to childhood fevers, as most families have, but 3 survive. And for this, she lights candles in gratitude at the cathedral. She does not know that ships have already docked in Sicily, carrying more than spices and silk. She does not know that in the port cities of the south, people are dying in ways that physicians cannot explain. She does not know that her world, everything she understands about life and death and God's plan for humanity, it's about to shatter like glass dropped on stone in the countryside. Life follows patterns unchanged for generations. A peasant farmer wakes before dawn in a one-room cottage he shares with his wife, 4 children, and the family's most valuable possession, an ox. The cottage has no windows, no chimney, just a hole in the thatch to let smoke escape. The floor is packed earth. They sleep on straw, all together for warmth in winter. The farmer owns nothing. The land he works belongs to the Lord, whose manor house stands on the hill. The ox is borrowed. Even the seed he plants must be given back in proportion after harvest. His day begins in darkness and ends in darkness for most of the year. He walks to fields still wet with dew, his feet wrapped in rags inside wooden clogs. The work is back-breaking, endless. Plowing, sowing, weeding, harvesting. Every task done by hand and animal power. No machine to ease the burden. His hands are calloused, thick as leather. His back aches constantly. He is 30 years old and looks 50. His wife works as hard. She tends a small garden plot, keeps chickens, spins wool, makes the family's clothes, cooks their meals, cares for the children, helps in the fields during harvest. She has been pregnant 7 times. 3 children survive. This is normal. This is life. Everyone she knows has lost children. The graveyard behind the church is filled with small graves. They eat bread. Mostly dark and coarse, sometimes so hard it must be soaked in water or ale to be chewed. Pottage, a thick soup of vegetables and grains, simmered for hours over the fire. On feast days, perhaps a bit of pork. Eggs when the chickens lay. No sugar, no spices, no variety. Their diet has not changed in centuries. They drink ale because water from the streams often brings sickness. Sunday brings respite. The church bells call everyone to Mass. The village priest, often barely literate himself, conducts the service in Latin that no one understands. The people stand. There are no pews for common folk. And listen to words they cannot comprehend but believe with absolute certainty. The church promises that suffering in this life will be rewarded in the next. That poverty and labor are God's will. That the hierarchy of society reflects the hierarchy of heaven. They believe because they must, because without this belief, the grinding hardship of their lives would be unendurable. But doubt creeps in at the edges. In cities, new ideas circulate. Scholars debate philosophy and natural law. Artists paint saints who look like real people with real emotions. Merchants keep accounts and calculate profit, thinking in numbers and logic rather than tradition and faith. The world is slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to change. Then the ships arrive in October of 1347. 12 Genoese trading galleys return from the Black Sea to the port of Messina in Sicily. The ships are delayed. Having fled the city of Kaffa on the Crimean coast, where a Mongol army besieged the Genoese trading post. The Mongols had catapulted plague-infected corpses over the city walls, a weapon of biological warfare before such concepts had names. The Genoese fled, but they carried death with them in the ship holds. When the galleys dock at Messina, the harbor master notices something wrong. Many of the sailors are dying or already dead. Those still alive are covered in strange black swellings in their groins and armpits, fever-mad, coughing blood. The authorities order the ships to leave, but it is already too late. The rats have scurried down the mooring ropes onto Sicilian soil. The fleas have already jumped to new hosts. Within days, people in Messina begin to sicken. It starts with fever and chills, headache and weakness. Then the buboes appear, swellings the size of eggs or apples in the lymph nodes of the groin, armpits, and neck. The pain is excruciating. The swellings turn black, giving the disease its name, the Black Death. Victims cough blood. Black spots appear on the skin where blood pools beneath the surface. The stench of the sick is unbearable, a putrid sweetness that fills every room where the infected lie. Most die within 3 to 5 days of the first symptoms. Some die faster, the pneumonic form taking them in a single day as their lungs fill with blood and they drown in their own bodies. almost no one recovers. The few who survive the bubonic form carry scars and weakness for the rest of their lives. The physicians of Messina have never seen anything like this. They consult ancient texts by Galen and Hippocrates. They bleed patients to balance the humors. They prescribe herbs and poultices. They advise people to avoid bad air. The miasma, they believe, carries disease. Nothing works. The physicians themselves begin to die, and the survivors flee by January of 1348. The plague has spread along the coast of Italy. Ships carry it to Genoa, to Pisa, to Venice. Each port becomes a new center of infection. From the ports, it travels inland along trade routes. Merchants carry it to Florence, to Siena, to Milan. Pilgrims carry it from shrine to shrine. Soldiers carry it with armies. It moves with the speed of commerce and the speed of panic. A Florentine apothecary named Giovanni tends to his shop in the spring of 1348. He has heard rumors of terrible disease in the south, but Florence has always been blessed, protected by God and good fortune. His shop smells of herbs and compounds. Clay jars line the shelves, labeled in careful script. Wormwood, chamomile, poppy, mandrake. He mixes remedies for common ailments, stomach complaints and aching joints, fevers and coughs. His knowledge comes from his master who taught him the trade, knowledge passed down through generations. His wife helps in the shop, grinding herbs with mortar and pestle. Their daughter, 15 years old, is preparing for marriage to a merchant's son. The dowry is arranged. The contracts are signed. The wedding will be in June, when the weather is fine. They have saved for years to give their daughter this future, this chance to marry up, to give her children a better life. In May, the first cases appear in Florence. A family in the Oltrarno district across the river. Then a household near the cathedral. Then more and more until the entire city realizes what is happening. The plague has arrived. The reaction is immediate and primal. Those who can afford to flee do so. Wealthy merchants close their houses and retreat to villas in the countryside, taking their families and whatever valuables they can carry. They believe the bad air of the city brings the pestilence. That clean country air will protect them. Some find safety this way, but many carry the disease with them, spreading it to villages that might have been spared. The roads out of Florence filled with carts and horses, with people on foot carrying bundles, with children crying and parents shouting. The exodus creates its own chaos, its own suffering. Those who cannot flee have no choice but to remain. The poor, who have never had choices, crowd closer together as the wealthy abandon entire neighborhoods. Giovanni the apothecary stays because his shop is his livelihood, his life's work, and because he believes he has remedies that might help. He mixes theriac, the ancient cure-all of crushed vipers, and dozens of herbs. He burns aromatic woods to purify the air. He advises people to avoid the sick, to keep windows closed against miasma, to pray for God's mercy. The plague does not discriminate, but it finds easiest purchase among the poor. In crowded tenements where families share single rooms, where 10 or 15 people sleep in spaces meant for 4, the disease spreads like fire through dry timber. A child sickens. Within 2 days, the entire family shows symptoms. Within a week, the whole building is infected. Bodies begin to pile up faster than they can be buried. The city's normal rhythms collapse. Shops close. Markets empty. The great cloth workshops that drive Florence's economy fall silent as workers die or flee. The streets that once rang with the sounds of commerce and craft echo now with different sounds. The rumble of carts carrying corpses. The wailing of mourners. The prayers of priests administering last rites. The screaming of those in the final agonies of the disease. Giovanni's daughter falls ill in early June, just weeks before her planned wedding. It starts with fever. She complains of headache and asks for water. Her mother feels her forehead and knows immediately. By evening, the swelling has appeared in her groin, and she is delirious with pain and fever. Giovanni tries everything he knows. He applies poultices to draw out the poison. He bleeds her to balance the humors. He burns sweet-smelling herbs in her room. He prays until his voice is hoarse. She dies on the third day. Her mother bathes the body, preparing it for burial, as she has done for countless others in her role as a woman of the household. But there is no dignity in death now. The graveyards are full. Bodies are buried in mass graves. Trenches dug in fields outside the city walls, where hundreds are laid together without marker or ceremony. The priests who once provided last rites are themselves dying. Many have fled. Those who remain work until exhaustion, moving from deathbed to deathbed, anointing the dying with holy oil, hearing final confessions, offering what comfort they can. Giovanni's wife sickens next. Then Giovanni himself. In a darkened room in Florence, a family that had hope and plans and a future dissolves into nothing. The shop stands empty, jars of useless remedies gathering dust. The daughter's wedding dress, carefully sewn and embroidered, hangs unworn. The dowry saved over decades of hard work means nothing now in the countryside. Peasants who thought themselves safe discover that distance provides no protection. Priests traveling between parishes carry the disease. Merchants bringing goods from cities carry it. Refugees seeking shelter carry it. A manor lord returns from Florence to his estate, bringing plague to the village that depends on him. Within weeks, half the village is dead. The social order that has governed life for centuries begins to fracture. With so many dead and dying, there are not enough workers to bring in the harvest. Fields of grain stand ripe and rotting because there are no hands to cut them. Livestock wander untended. Valuable sheep and cattle die of neglect. The careful agricultural cycle that has sustained civilization for thousands of years breaks down. Some peasants see opportunity in catastrophe. With workers scarce, they demand higher wages. They refuse to work for traditional rates. They move to new manors, where lords desperate for labor offer better terms. The rigid feudal system that kept peasants bound to the land begins to crack. Lords try to enforce old laws, old obligations. But they lack the power when half their workers are dead and the survivors know their labor is suddenly valuable in the cities. The breakdown of order is even more dramatic. With traditional authority collapsing, some people abandon all restraint. They drink and feast, reasoning that if death is certain, they might as well enjoy their final days. They break into the houses of the dead and loot whatever they can carry. They rob the sick and dying, stealing from those too weak to resist. Others turn to desperate piety. Processions of flagellants walk the streets, beating themselves with whips until blood flows, trying to appease God's wrath with their suffering. They believe the plague is divine punishment for human sin, and that only extreme penance can save them. The flagellants move from town to town, hundreds of them marching in formation, chanting prayers and hymns, stripping to the waist and lashing their backs with leather whips embedded with metal points. Blood spatters the streets where they pass. They preach that the end times are upon humanity, that this is the apocalypse foretold in Scripture. In some places, they are welcomed as holy men. In others, they are driven away as disturbers of the peace. The church hierarchy views them with suspicion. These laymen claiming direct communication with God. But the hierarchy itself is shattered and lacks power to control them. Fear seeks scapegoats. In Germany and France, mobs turn on Jewish communities, blaming them for poisoning wells and spreading plague. Despite papal pronouncements that Jews die of plague at the same rate as Christians. Despite the obvious illogic of the accusations, massacres occur. Entire communities are burned alive. In Strasbourg, 900 Jews are killed in a single day. In Mainz, in Cologne, in dozens of towns. Centuries-old Jewish communities are destroyed by terrified, Christian populations seeking someone to blame for incomprehensible suffering. A Jewish physician in Avignon, where the Pope himself resides, witnesses the destruction of his community. He has served Christian patients for decades, has saved countless lives with his knowledge of medicine. None of it matters now. He watches his synagogue burn. He helps neighbors flee, hiding them in his cellar as mobs roam the streets. He cannot save them all. He cannot save his own family. His wife and sons die not of plague, but of violence. Human evil unleashed by fear, by autumn of 1348. The plague has consumed Italy and is spreading north and west. It crosses the Alps into France and Germany. It reaches Paris in August, and the French capital, the greatest city north of the Alps, descends into nightmare. In the narrow streets of the Isle de la Cite, bodies pile up faster than they can be removed. The Seine fills with corpses thrown from bridges. The air itself seems to thicken with death. England receives the plague in June of 1348, when a ship from Calais docks at Melcombe in Dorset. The disease spreads through the English countryside with terrifying speed. By November, it has reached London. The English chronicles will record that the living can barely bury the dead, that entire villages are abandoned, that wolves return to areas they had not inhabited in generations because there are no longer humans to drive them away. In a monastery in Yorkshire, a monk named Brother Thomas keeps a chronicle of events. He writes in careful Latin on precious parchment, recording the deaths of his brothers. First the abbot, then the prior, then the brothers, one by one. The monastery has stood for 300 years, a community of prayer and learning, copying manuscripts and tending the sick. Brother Thomas writes about the silence that falls over the cloister as death claims voice after voice. The bells that rang for prayer 8 times a day fall silent as there is no one left to ring them. He writes about the last days when only a handful of brothers remain. They are too weak to maintain the routine of prayer that has structured their days. They can barely bury their dead brothers in the monastery graveyard. Brother Thomas writes that he does not know if anyone will ever read his words, if there will be anyone left to read them. His chronicle ends mid-sentence. Perhaps the plague took him before he could finish. Perhaps he simply lost hope and set down his pen. Across Europe, similar stories unfold in countless variations. A mother in Bruges watches all 5 of her children die in a single week. A master craftsman in Vienna buries his apprentices and has no one to pass his knowledge to. A farmer in Castile stands alone in fields that once employed 20 men. A bishop in Prague administers last rites to his entire cathedral chapter and then receives them himself from a terrified young priest. The scale of death defies comprehension. Modern historians estimate that between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's population dies between 1347 and 1353. In some regions, the mortality is even higher. In Tuscany, perhaps 60% of the population perishes. Cities shrink to shadows of themselves. Villages vanish entirely, their empty houses collapsing back into the earth. The psychological trauma may be even more devastating than the physical loss. People watch their world, the only world they have ever known, dissolve around them. The certainties they lived by, that God protects the faithful, that the social order is divinely ordained, that human life has meaning and purpose. All of these certainties crumble in the face of random, incomprehensible death. Children die as readily as adults. The pious die as readily as sinners. Priests and monks who devote their lives to God die in agony. Some lose faith entirely. If this is God's plan, they reason, then God is either cruel or powerless, and either conclusion is unbearable. Others cling to faith more desperately, reasoning that they must deserve this punishment. that they must be even more devout, more penitent, more fearful. The Church itself struggles to provide answers. Theologians write treatises attempting to explain divine justice. They fail to convince even themselves in 1349. The plague begins to recede in some areas, though it will return in waves for centuries. Those who survive emerge into a transformed world. The cities are half empty. Whole professions have vanished because all the practitioners died. Orphans wander the streets. Fields lie fallow for lack of workers. The economy is shattered, but from devastation comes unexpected change. With labor scarce, peasants negotiate for better conditions. Serfdom begins its slow decline. Wages rise. Some workers acquire land and property for the first time in their family's history. Women take on roles previously denied them, running businesses and workshops because the men who ran them are dead. The rigid social hierarchy loosens, and mobility becomes possible in ways it never was before. A young woman in London, daughter of a cloth merchant who died of plague, inherits his business at age 19. In the old world, this would have been impossible. A woman could not run a business. But there is no one else, and the guildmasters are dead or too busy surviving to enforce old rules. She proves capable. She expands the business. She marries on her own terms, choosing a partner rather than accepting her father's choice. She raises daughters and teaches them that they can do more than their grandmothers. Ever imagined cultural shifts follow economic ones. Art begins to focus more on human experience and less on idealized religious themes. Writers compose in vernacular languages rather than Latin, making literature accessible to those outside the clergy. Science and medicine, having failed so completely during the plague, began a slow process of questioning ancient authorities and seeking knowledge through observation rather than tradition. The seeds of the Renaissance are planted in plague-scarred soil. The plague year of 1348 and the years that follow constitute a hinge. Point in human history. The medieval world, with its certainties and hierarchies, dies along with half of Europe's population. What emerges is recognizably more modern, a world where individual merit can matter more than birth, where questioning authority becomes possible, where the common person has value because labor is precious, but the cost is almost beyond reckoning. Every grave holds a universe of lost potential. The children who never grew up. The artisans whose skills died with them. The mothers who never held their babies. The lovers who never met. The books never written. The songs never sung. The countless small moments of joy and beauty that never happened because death came first. In a village in Provence, now almost empty, an old woman sits in the doorway of her house. She is one of perhaps 10 survivors from a population that numbered 200. Everyone she loved is gone. Her husband, her children, her grandchildren, her friends and neighbors. She sits in the late afternoon sun and remembers. She remembers feast days and harvests. She remembers her daughter's wedding. She remembers the sound of children playing in the street. She remembers when the world made sense. The sun sets over empty fields, over silent cities, over a Europe transformed. The plague will return in waves for generations. Never again as devastating as this first terrible outbreak, but always present, always feared. It will shape how people think about death and life, about God and fate, about the fragility of everything they hold dear. The Black Death becomes woven into European consciousness. A collective trauma that echoes through centuries, but life persists because it must. Survivors rebuild. They marry and have children. They plant crops and tend animals. They open shops and practice trades. They laugh and sing and love. They create beauty and meaning from the ruins. They prove that human resilience, that stubborn determination to continue living even after witnessing the worst, is perhaps the most powerful force in history. The deadliest year in human history does not end humanity. It transforms it, painfully and permanently, into something new. And that transformation, born in suffering and death, carries forward into all the centuries that follow. Shaping the world that we inherit, the world that rose from the ashes of 1348.